Hi, we're going to attempt to show you the common mistakes made in double knitting and how to fix them. At least these are the common mistakes I make in double knitting. Now this is standard double knitting where the rule is whatever you do to the first stitch, you do the exact opposite to the second stitch. So if you knit with gray, you purl with burgundy. If you knit with burgundy, you purl with gray. There are other forms of double knitting that's not always the case, but in this case, we're just talking standard double knitting where you're knitting with one color, purling with the other for every pair. All right, so we have 3 mistakes here, and to fix these 3 mistakes, I need a couple of tools. We need our knitting needles, we need a crochet hook, and we need a locking stitch marker. Now, for most of these, the locking stitch marker is in fact a optional item, but it's a very, very helpful item. Okay, so our first mistake as we are coming along is we get to this spot here. Trying to get some decent light on this because it's very dark in here. Is you get to this point here and you suddenly realize you have 3 of the same color. Well, if you're always doing the exact opposite of the first stitch for the second stitch, you can't have 3 in a row. It's always going to be one of one color, one of the other color. Except in the case where you're changing colors, right? Because you're knitting the first stitch, you're purling the second stitch, so you are always changing colors. So when you come to see these 3 stitches are burgundy, gray, burgundy, gray, burgundy, gray. That's 3 pairs of stitches, I should say. And then we switch to gray, burgundy. So you're going to have 2 gray stitches side by side. 2 is fine. That means you've changed color order for the next pair, right? But 3 is not fine because you should always have one color, one the other color. When you come over here, you'll see you have 2 burgundies. So the same rule applies. We have now switched from the order of gray burgundy to the order burgundy gray. So the 2 are okay, but 3 are a problem. So we need to fix that first set. And we need to do that first by figuring out which stitch is the wrong color. Was this supposed to be a burgundy gray set or a gray burgundy set? And we look at our pattern and see, oh, that should have been gray burgundy. So we go, we've got gray burgundy, so that one's okay. Ah, this one should have been gray, and that one's still burgundy. So rather than knitting to those, I am going to slip my stitches. You will probably have knit up to it and then realized you have the mistake. So these stitches will have been knitted. All right, so I've slipped the stitches to that point, and this doesn't require any additional tools because it's just this row that we need, this one stitch we need to fix. So I am going to pick up the stitch below it with my knitting needle, slide the bad stitch out, put the first stitch back on my left needle so that it's in a proper position, making sure that the right leg is forward. Grab the yarn that should be the right color. Now you're going to be able to tell which yarn is the one to grab by turning over and looking to see where is the yarn that is connected to this stitch right here. Okay, this gray stitch right here. And when I tug on it, it pulls this stitch so I know I've got the right yarn. Place it on the needle and pull the stitch over. Now my stitch has been corrected. It's the right color. and I can knit on. This particular method of fixing this problem may cause some tension issues. Primarily, this stitch is possibly going to be a little tight. It's not going to be horribly tight, but it could be a little bit tight. But with this stitch here, you're likely to get a loose stitch because you've now added extra yarn in between these two. So be very careful when you purl the stitch not to pull on it too hard. And when you do finish, make sure to tug on this one just a little bit and the others on either side to kind of semi-correct the tension. If that tension difference is too much, you may find it best to just tink back and fix it that way. But this method does work. All right, my second problem is right here where I see that I have a burgundy stitch instead of a gray stitch. Okay. Now, the question is, did I do the same thing I did up here, and I have burgundy on either side of it in the purl stitches, or have I knit them in the wrong color order? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over. Had to give myself a little leeway with my yarn ends here. And notice that I do have a gray stitch on the other side, and when I pull them apart, I can kind of see there's the burgundy stitch that's wrong, there's the gray stitch that's wrong. So both of those stitches are incorrect. Okay, so I am going to use my locking stitch marker. If you have a real sticky yarn or you're very confident, you don't need this, but this will help make the process a little smoother. So I'm going to put my locking stitch marker on there. I'm going to slip this stitch back over. I don't want to do anything with it yet. I know I'm going to have to fix it, but let's deal with this one first, because it's always easiest to fix this when you're facing the knit side of that stitch. Okay, it's a little easier to do the fix. So I'm going to unknit, or I'm going to pull out those stitches. I'm trying to see what I'm doing here. There we go. Now I got it. I'm going to pull out those stitches. I'm going to kind of give them a little tug just to see where they all are. And now it's time to get my crochet hook. I'm going to stick my crochet hook into this stitch, making sure not to twist it. I almost twisted it there. I will tell you that I can't really see what's happening on camera, so that's a bit of a challenge. All right, so I'm going to set my locking stitch marker aside, and now I need to find the burgundy strand that should have been in this stitch. So if I look, I have this strand that comes from the stitch I'm on. Let's see if I can show it to you better. There you go. There's the strand that is attached to this stitch here. And it comes up under this stitch and becomes this stitch. So we know we don't want that stitch. It's the one above it. So I'm going to just kind of put my thumb there. And then this strand, you can see when you tug on it, where does it come from? Well, it's coming through this gray stitch. And that means that it's going to this stitch because that's the other side of this error. Okay, so that's the one we want, and we're going to just pull it through our stitch. Okay, do the same thing, figure out which is the next one. That's this stitch. And the final one, which is on our needle, and pull it through. And now we're up to the top, so we can put this back on the needle. All right, now I'm going to slip that stitch back over to this right needle and flip my work because I know I've still got the error on the other side that I still have to fix. I'm going to repeat that exact same process. I'm going to put my stitch marker in. I'm going to drop the stitch. I'm going to pull those out. Sorry, I just tapped my light here because I'm trying to get you decent light, so it's like sitting right on top of me. All right, I'm going to put my crochet hook in. Oops, wrong end. I can take the stitch marker out, and I'm taking it out because I know it kind of interferes with you seeing what I'm doing. You can, if you want, leave it in until you're done fixing. All right, so this is the strand, and you may see this better on this side. This is the strand that is attached to this yarn, and it goes to this stitch. Okay, I've been pulling on it, so it's pulled that stitch kind of tight. This strand, however, goes to the stitch above it. Okay, so that's the one I'm going to pull through. This strand goes to the stitch above that. And again, the stitch on the needle. And now I have fixed both of those stitches. Okay, I now have the correct colors on both sides. The tension issues that you see at this point, just give them a little tug. They will work their way out. You won't need to worry about them in the future because the extra float that was created when we fixed the other stitch doesn't exist because you have used an incorrect stitch to create the correct one. So the right amount of yarn was there, it just was the yarn was in the wrong places. Now, the last stitch, the last error is not even visible on this side of the work. And this is common, especially when you're working in the round, that you don't see an error when you're working it. Okay, so every once in a while, it's really, really important to turn your work over and look for mistakes. Okay, the first two are obvious from either side, but this one is only obvious from the back. You can see a float right here that goes across my stitch that is not a stitch, it's a float. Now, this has been caused by accidentally forgetting to bring the yarn forward or backward when you were knitting the stitch. Usually you will see it immediately if you forget to take it to the back. But if you forget to bring the knit yarn forward when you go to purl the stitch, it's going to leave this float across the back of your work, or the far side of your work, I should say. So if you're working in the round, check your knitting fairly regularly so that you don't get these way, way down and have a color pattern that you now have to worry about. I've made this really simple by keeping the same color pattern in the column, but if you're working from a chart with a color pattern, you may have 2 or 3 gray stitches and then maybe 1 or 2 burgundy stitches, etc. So you don't want to have to drop back too far because then you have to remember to follow your chart and know which rows you're bringing back up. Most of the time, the floats are going to be fairly obvious because they're going to be the loose ones, but it doesn't mean that you can't make a mistake. And so you need to track it with your chart, and for each stitch, know which color you need to pick up. This is a pretty simple error, though, to fix. I'm going to look for the stitch that this lies right at the bottom of. It'll kind of nestle right at the V. And I'm going to go from underneath it. So I'm going to come up here with my thumb and I'm going to pull that up because this is the stitch that it's covering. And I'm going to put my stitch marker in that stitch. Okay? Now you can kind of see it's in the stitch that's underneath that float. You can take it to one stitch below if you want to, but it's not necessary. And as far as I'm concerned, dropping down as few stitches as possible is the best way to do this. All right, let me slip my stitches until I get there. Just kind of work my way over. All right, and this is my stitch, the column that I need to work with. And again, I'm going to just drop those stitches down, and I'm going to start taking them and popping them out. It's just one stitch at a time. That lamp is just literally right on my lap here, guys. So now I've gotten to the stitch where the stitch marker is. I'm just going to grab the stitch marker and I'm going to pop it out. And now that float is in the center of the work. Since you are laddering back up all of the exact same yarns that you just popped out, you'll see that they're kind of a little loose. They're not, depending on your gauge, it may not be quite this loose, but you can pretty well see the ladder. You can see the stitch and then the yarns that you need to pick up. So we're going to just ladder them back up the same way we've been doing with all the other stitches. So pretty much all of your fixes are going to relate to dropping down and picking back up the stitches until you've corrected your mistake. And there you have it. All your stitches are now correct. There's no floats. Everything's in the right color order. And you're back to knitting. Have a great day and happy knitting.